short but sweet interview of Miss Pallavi Aiyar, author of Orienting in Japan. I would like to introduce Ms. Pallavi Aiyar. An award-winning journalist, Pallavi Aiyar has worked as a foreign correspondent for over 2 decades in China, Indonesia, and Japan. She is associate editor of The Globalist and writes weekly Substack newsletter on global culture, The Global Jigsaw. Pallavi is a young global leader of the World Economic Forum and has served of the WEF's Global Council on the future of media and entertainment. She is the author of several books, including The China Mirror, Smoke and Mirrors, the novels Chinese Whisker and Jakarta Tales, and an exploration of Europe's challenges, New Old World. Her latest book is Orienting and Indian in Japan. Pallavi was a Reuters Fellow of Oxford University and is the youngest winner of the Prem Bhatia Memorial Prize for political reporting for her dispatches from China. Pallavi is currently based in Madrid, and I would like to introduce Mr. Siddharth Deshmukh, fourth and current president of IJBC, who will be moderating this interview. Mr. Siddharth Deshmukh, over to you.
So, Konnichiwa, Pallavi, and Konnichiwa all. I have so much of excitement that I want to first get settled down, because today I'm going to talk with one of my favorite authors. And I think it's pleasure. It's feel amazing when you can talk to your author face to face and discuss and get the first-hand experience and of writing the book and what went into that book while writing, what went into thought process of author in writing that book. And today I'm very glad that I'm able to talk with you. So welcome, Pallavi. So I was saying that I'm so glad today that I'm able to talk with my one of favorite author. Almost I read your blogs weekly, and almost I read if not all books, but yeah, some of those books, especially about India, Japan, and China. And I'm very glad to have you today at Konnichiwa Pune.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it's wonderful to hear that you enjoy my writing. That's always, that's the reason we write. so that's very lovely to hear this morning.
Absolutely, absolutely. I was just a couple of weeks back in Japan, and latest book I read about your book is Orienting, and I feel like, this is an opportunity that you should definitely come to Konnichiwa Pune and talk about this book and talk about your own experience about Japan. It's because, as you see in a previous session also, if you were there, you must have heard that many people have a very old impression about each other's country. They used to travel last and then it was the same experience. The things have changed, and you went to the changed Japan, as well as the interesting fact was that when I went to Japan, it was exactly the same. The few of the panelists in 2000, so there was a different Japan, there was a different India. And when you went to Japan, maybe there was a different Japan, so your experience was different. Literally, I was creating a kind of a virtual book in my mind that on the side of your experience, what was my experience when last time I went to Japan. Before we start talking about book, I want you to tell our audience something about you, how you went to Japan, and you as a person, as a Pallavi, and then we will go to the book.
Absolutely. So, Siddharth, I actually grew up in India, in New Delhi. And I was there for my school, and then I went to England to study at university, and I always wanted to be a journalist. And I thought what I wanted to be was a broadcast journalist, because private television 1990s, which is when I was entering the workforce, and it seemed like a very interesting area to explore. So I returned to India and I got a job with NDTV, which in those days used to produce all the programming for Star News. This was before NDTV became its own channel. And I realized while I was doing TV that it was not actually fulfilling me, because I found TV stories to be quite superficial, very short in terms of length, and not really able to get under the skin of their subject. So I decided to study further, and I went back to England to do a master's program. And while over there, I basically fell in love. I met the person who is now my husband. At the time was my boyfriend, and he's from Spain, and he had spent the last 2 or 3 years studying East Asian languages, Japanese, but also Chinese. And he was very convinced that, you know, China was going to be a sort of earth-shaking country and force going forward, and that we needed to get to know China better if we were to basically grow up in the 21st century and find our careers over there. So he was quite prophetic, because I'm talking about 2000, before China had joined the World Trade Organization, before it loomed as large of a presence in the global imagination. So anyway, I eventually ended up going to became a journalist and started to when we left China, I wrote a book about the country called Smoke and Mirrors, an experience of China. I also learned the language, I think, which was very important if you were really going to explore the country. And there were very few Indians who were in that position. And I also realized during that whole experience that, you know, we were learning about these parts of the world in East Asia, for example, really through a Western lens. And we had very little direct writing by Indians on these parts of the world that would help us to understand their cultures and their societies, but in a comparative framework with India, or with India as the implicit norm. Normally, when you read about China in the Western media, the person who's writing about it has an implicit norm in at the back of the head, the lens through which they interpret what they are observing. And that lens is, you know, a Western lens, naturally. And I think we were missing that Indian lens. So anyway, the next few years, my husband is a diplomat, and we ended up moving around the world. And we spent a few years in Europe. We spent 4 years in Jakarta in Indonesia. And then we moved to Japan. And I found Japan really fascinating. I mean, there's all the linkages between Japan and China. Japan has borrowed so much of its history, its language, its traditions from China, and yet it has made them its own and completely unique. And I found that fascinating. And also, you know, when I left China, it was in 2008, which was when Beijing held the Olympic Games. And when I arrived in Japan in 2016, Japan was going to hold the next Olympic Games in 2020, although of course COVID put paid to that. So I also like the way that the games kind of framed my experience in both of these cultures. And like I've been doing for the last several years, I was working as a reporter. I was a columnist for The Hindu and doing weekly pieces on Japanese culture, society, politics, economics for 4 years. And at the end of that, I sat down, I looked at all the reportage I had, and I amalgamated it along with a kind of memoir, telling my own story and the story of my family. And how that unfolded over 4 years. And so we end up having my book, Orienting and Indian in Japan, which is laid out as a partly autobiography, partly anecdotes. I call it the 3 A's. And I basically look at different aspects of Japanese society, culture, politics, and divide it thematically. So for example, we have chapters on the seasons, on the language, on racism, on food, on cleanliness, on India-Japan historical relations, on politics, and on the coronavirus. These would be the main themes. And then I've also organized them chronologically so that they somehow fit into telling the story of my personal story of arrival, learning, reporting, living, working, and eventually departure.
It's a very fascinating journey, and you made it a book of your journey, of your
Yes.
observations. We will still come to your book. I have one more question to ask you. If you were not author, if you were not writing book, how was still Japan for you? As a just a normal citizen visiting Japan, living out there, what was your that personal experience of living in Japan?
You know, it was absolutely fascinating because it was such an amazing mixture of something that is familiar and something that is completely unfamiliar. And when I say familiar, it's because I think ultimately it is an Asian country, and you know, we do have these Hindu-Buddhist connections, and there are things that, you know, will resonate, like people taking their shoes off before entering the house, or folding your hands in a temple, or you know, a lot of the sort of hospitality. I mean, there will be things that you connect with. I think, and there's a special resonance as a result. It's not a completely alien culture, but on the other hand, it is very unique, and it is, and more so than I think any other Asian country. It presents a really brilliant mix of the anthropological excitement of a country that isn't all that well known internationally, but with all the first comforts that you might expect in the West. But you know, it's not as known in India as the West in terms of movies and all the sort of from the West. So I really enjoyed that. The known and the unknown, and the things, also the kind of things that seem like completely from another planet, and the comfort and ease of life of the beguiling anthropological nature of less discovered culture with very ancient roots and traditions that continue to be present. So, you know, I mean, it's almost hard not to fall in love with it. It's just incredible beauty, incredible cleanliness, incredible, there's a lot to admire. And I think especially coming from the kind of large, chaotic megalopolises of the countries I was used to, like India, China, Indonesia, it presents such a study in contrast that it was just superbly interesting. It sort of sucks you in right from the beginning. So it's a wonderful place to visit. I mean, as a destination for a tourist or somebody to live in for a while as well, I think it's really eye-opening, and we learn a lot about a culture and a society that has really achieved a lot of you know, civic responsibility, a lot of a sense of public consciousness, a lot of sense of putting the comfort and needs of others before your own. All of these things are really remarkable in Japan, and I think not just for us Asians, but for the world to learn from.
I think what you said is right. It's really fascinating country, and things are in a way completely different, but many time we can compare them, and many time we can relate with them. So after Japan, immediately after the Japan, I visited Europe, almost a few countries, and I got earlier. I was comparing Japan with India all the time, and then I got this habit of started comparing with Japan and Europe. And I want to pick up one of your chapters where you discuss about the toilets. So the first time I realized that I comparing with India and Japan in terms of a toilet, it's not like only India and Japan. Maybe if you start comparing that with Europe, still Japan is, I think people should stop comparing with Japan about the toilets, right?
They're on another planet. It's uncomparable.
Right. So what I don't know this question somebody asked you or not, but why you thought to dedicate one chapter on that topic, and what was that you thought? I mean, is it just an observation, or you really wanted to convey some message?
I wanted to convey a message. So, I start the chapter by saying that I've often been interested in toilets, and in many parts of the world that I've lived in, I've written extensively about toilets. And I don't want to give the impression that I have an unhealthy obsession with the bathroom. The reason is that I believe that in a society's attitude to sanitation, we can actually uncover a lot about the social history and trajectory of that country. Our own Gandhiji had long ago said that, in toilet cleaning lay true dignity of labor. And until every Indian was cleaning their own toilets, we could not achieve true dignity of labor and equality in our country. So I think it's a very important element, how toilets are seen in a country, what kind of position they are given, whether it's something that's seen as dirty and not to be thought about, or whether it's something that we actually see as very important to public health, as very important to human society. So when I was in China, I used to write about toilet cleaners and written a lot of stories comparing toilet cleaners in China to toilet cleaners in India, as a way of trying to understand how the communist revolution had altered Chinese society in a very revolutionary way that was missing in India. When I was in Indonesia, I spent 4 days with farmers who had become toilet entrepreneurs and had begun to make toilets and sell them in villages, and also with some religious leaders, kiai, imams, who were basically talking about toilets and hygiene in their Friday sermons in these villages, and had led to the first open defecation free area in central Indonesia at the time. So it's always something that, is at the back of my mind. And Japanese toilets, of course, are world famous. I mean, you don't have to go to Japan to know about it. So the Japanese toilet is legendary, right? And it's also something that immediately you see. It's one of the first things you do. You need to visit you take a long flight, you get off at the airport, you need to quickly go into the loo. And it's quite hilarious because they look they look like a rocket ship almost. I mean, you see all the buttons and it feels like you're in a cockpit of an airplane and that you're about to take off. So it's a ubiquitous thing. You use the toilet almost every day. But look, going even deeper than that, I felt that being a woman, one of the best things about living in Japan was the fact that I could be out in the public space anytime, day or night, in any part of the country, and feel confident that I could find a very clean, hygienic toilet to use at any time of the day. And that really transforms your experience of public spaces. It gives you a lot more freedom in terms of being able to just be out of the house. And that's something people don't realize. For women, it can be very difficult, if you're going to go on a long journey and you're not going to be able to access a clean toilet. So it was actually that was probably my one. People always ask, what was your favorite thing about a country? And it's very difficult to answer because it's a bit like choosing your favorite child. You like so many things. It's hard to say this one and not that one. But if I was forced to give an answer, I would say the cleanliness and the ubiquity of the public toilets. You could use them in a park. You could take your child to a playground, and if the child needed to use the toilet, beautiful toilet for them, or for the parents who were looking after the child.
Indian actress, watching some interviews randomly, and she told me, what, I have recently featured the imported Toto toilet in my home. So I was thinking, wow, is it so amazing while as Toto is everywhere in Japan, and I don't think nobody think about that Toto is something you feel very happy to put it into your home. Anyway,
it's becoming huge. Yeah, and all the people in the US have it. I mean, people in Spain, where I live now, have heard of it. It's really like becoming a sort of powerful part of Japanese soft culture. I think Toto should not be underestimated. Yeah.
Yeah. So moving ahead, I think first or second chapter only you discussed about you face such huge problem with bank account, right? You finally couldn't have your own bank account. Can you hear me? Are you there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm here.
Yeah. Yeah. So about the bank account, and I was wondering, is it really, because I never faced that problem. I never, not a single thing I faced that problem. So question came to my mind is like you are married to Spanish, and so I am married
Yes.
to Japanese. So does it make difference? I mean, in Japan, because I never experienced that sort of a thing, or I never have that kind of experience, probably because I am married with Japanese. Uh, in true sense, I never experienced being a completely expatriate there. So I wanted to hear your experience about the expatriate, because you dedicated almost one chapter or some part of it to your bank account issue. So can you tell me that? What was your
No, so
experience as a completely expatriate?
yes. Okay. So the bank account issue, and then I'll move on to the larger question behind your observation. To be honest, whenever we experience something, we experience it in a comparative framework. We are comparing it to our experience in the past of how it was, right?
Right.
So, for example, I think if you go from India and then you go to Japan, maybe it's so difficult to open a bank account in India. I don't know, because I haven't done it for 25 years, but maybe you don't find the Japanese one that complicated. I had moved to Japan from Indonesia, and in my mind, Indonesia would be much more backward than Japan, because it's a poorer country, it's developing, and with Japan we have a image of it being very high tech, and of it being very gadget driven, and I thought it would be very digital and all of that. And I was very surprised that actually in Southeast Asia, in Indonesia, a lot of these processes were far easier than they were in Japan. Like opening a bank account takes 10 minutes, getting your internet connection doesn't take long, getting a mobile phone doesn't take long, you can make digital payments everywhere, you can get a credit card almost instantaneously. And in Japan, it took us about 3.5 hours to open my husband's bank account. Now, when I told somebody this, they wrote to me saying, well, that's normal. In India, it can take much longer, maybe. But like I said, I was comparing it to Indonesia, which is where I had just moved for, where it took about half an hour. And it was not just the length, 3.5 hours. It was that most of the time we didn't know what was going on. People were whispering to each other in like closed doors while we were kept outside. And at the end of it all, we were told that, for example, we could not get a joint account because they do not exist. So my husband and I could not have a joint account. And if I wanted a bank account, I would have to go through that same 3.5 hour long procedure again, which felt really horrible. Like I was like, I can't take this. And also, when we asked for a credit card, they actually looked at us very worried and said, it will be very difficult for you to handle the credit card because we don't offer this service for foreigners. So it's better if you get Amex or apply for it separately. So it's the bank itself telling you, don't do it, rather than trying to sell it to you, which was just such a, like what I was saying earlier about how putting the needs of others in front of your own needs and providing a very high level of service is extremely important. Kind of worry that they will not be able to do that with foreigners for cultural reasons, for linguistic reasons. They do not want to disappoint, and they are very risk averse. So it's a bit like, what if a person complains? What if it doesn't like it? And so there's this kind of imagining. There's a sense of caution when dealing with foreigners, because there's always this sense that that the customer will be unhappy maybe, and the result is that they would rather just not deal with you at all than deal with you and possibly face a problem in the future. So I think there was that sense. So my experience as an expat was also quite unique because I was a diplomat. My husband is a diplomat, so we were in a diplomatic status, and we lived in a very elite part of town. And so I don't know if you can compare that to just an ordinary person who comes in to work. And I think they face a lot of discrimination when it comes to housing access and maybe banks and so on. That was a problem I didn't have.
So I think there was one mention of a same some experience about the restaurant as well. Because in my experience, I heard of many stories that some of the restaurant don't allow the foreigners because not because of discrimination, but usually they don't know how to serve the foreigners. I was it
Yes.
that experience also you mentioned, yeah.
Right, I write about it. It's not something I directly experienced, but I saw, for example, one of my good friends was in Kyoto and took a photograph of a sign in front of a restaurant which said "Foreigners not welcome," and sent it to me. And also, I have been to restaurants where I have seen that there are many, many empty seats, and they will just say it's completely full and not kind of give any explanation. And I have spoken to my Japanese friends about this, and the explanation they give is the one you mentioned, which is that, oh yeah, sometimes they don't speak English, they don't know how to deal with foreigners, and they are ashamed and afraid that the foreigners will not enjoy it, so they would rather just keep them out. And perhaps that's the reason. I don't know. It seems overtly racist to me. It was something that I thought would be unacceptable in any part of the rest of the world. I mean, can you imagine going to America? I would push the matter. They would give me other explanations like, there's a lot of Chinese kind of anti-foreigner or Japanese only, is to keep the Chinese groups out. And that did not, I mean, that was supposed to make me feel better, because what they were implying is that it's not your kind of foreigner, it's these terrible Chinese. But that's also appalling and racist. So frankly, I mean, to me, any sort of Japanese only rule in public establishments, I mean, they're not public establishments, they're private establishments. It's a private restaurant, it's a private on or private clinic, makes it sound as though you can base entry on the nationality of racist, actually, because we also know this guy Arduto, who I interviewed extensively, who to a Japanese lady, and for the last 20 years he's been trying to raise awareness of this. Since 20 years ago, he was not allowed into a Japanese onsen, because even though he was a Japanese citizen, he was ethnically not Japanese. And in the end, he had two daughters, and they allowed the daughter that looked Japanese to go in, but the daughter that looked foreign was not allowed in. So in the same family, two people were allowed in, all Japanese citizens, based on who looks Japanese and who doesn't. And it's not as though these incidents are happening all the time. I have been to many onsen and I've never experienced that myself. But the fact that they even happen sometimes and with regularity, this Arduto has a web page in which people can report their experiences from across the archipelago, and every day somebody will be uploading something like this. I think while within Japanese culture, they actually see it as not that problematic, they need to start having that conversation and that realization that if you are going to be in a more global world, this kind of attitude is problematic. And it's not enough to just say that it's to not to inconvenience the client. That is a very disingenuous argument, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I think there are many kind of experiences like in local usually people don't sit besides foreigner that I have experienced by my many times. It's not always racist kind of a thing, but maybe sometimes shy, or sometimes they don't want to deal with speaking in English, or so many reasons. It can be so many reasons. Now coming back to the book. Uh, you started writing this book while in Japan, or you experienced everything and then you thought, okay, now I have enough things to write about the book. Uh, the question, this question is because I think writing book is like, once you have enough to talk or enough to tell about something. Writing blog is like everyday experience, and you go and write about it. But while reading your book, it feels like so entertaining. It feels like every day you're writing it. I mean, you planned this book, or it just happened?
I actually wrote the majority of it in my last year in Japan. So that was after 3 years. So I would say the first 3 years were the period of research, reflection, observation, collecting information, meeting people, getting my thoughts in order. And then the fourth year, I began to write it. And I almost finished the book. But then we left Japan, and everything had changed because of COVID in the last 6 months. So, for example, a lot of my book had been written with the Olympic Games in mind, and then suddenly there were no Olympic Games, and I had not addressed COVID in the book when I had written it, and then of course, that became something I had to talk about. When I had written it, Abe-san, Shinzo Abe, was a very big character, but then by the time the book was being published, he was already no longer the prime minister. So, a lot changed in that last year with the following coronavirus. So I finished the book when I was in Spain. The first 6 months of being in Spain were when I was updating the book and revising it, keeping in mind the things that had evolved and changed over the last 6 months following the pandemic. So yeah, that's how it happened. But like I never said out. I'm never sure when I arrive in a country what I'm going to have to say about it. It comes through that experience. It comes through life and through living. Empirical. It's not like I pick a topic and then I decide to research it and spend like an academic many hours in the library researching it. It's more like it comes out organically from life's experiences. And for that, you have to live those experiences. So, 3 years, 4 years is necessary of actually living and talking to people and thinking about it before it takes the shape of a book.
So yes, exactly. But it might be experience change with as you said, we lived there and experience. But probably if you could speak Japanese, do you think the book would have some more different aspect, or maybe things
Yeah.
would have changed?
I think it would be very, very different. And the thing is that I think that any book that's written about a place, especially by a foreigner, is not only about that place. It is about the person who is writing it, because obviously that person, if you're a woman, if you're a man, if you're an Indian, if you're an American, if you speak Japanese, if you don't speak Japanese, if you are poor, if you are rich, if you are expat, if you are migrant worker, it really depends on your social, economic position, how you will see the country, and what are the things that will strike you about the country, and who are the kinds of people that you will end up talking to. So, I mean, many different books can be written about the same country depending on who the author is, and they will all be equally valid, because I think any book about a place is a partial truth. And to claim that this is the definitive book, or this is telling you about Japan, full stop, is wrong. This is telling you about Japan through my eyes. And it is therefore telling you as much about me as it is telling you about Japan. And for me, that's a very important thing to make explicit in my books, which is why I put myself as a character in the books. And I explain myself in the books. What is my background? Where am I coming from? Do I speak the language? Do I not speak the language? What difficulties did I have? So that the reader can then also know that. What are my failings as the author? Because I'm not claiming that this is the ultimate book on Japan. I am claiming Japan through Pallavi's eyes. And Pallavi is this person who has all of these limitations. I'm not a guru or a pandit who is telling you that, come to me for all your answers on Japan. I'm giving you a snapshot of Japan, and in a hopefully thoughtful way that has taken research, that has taken effort, that is sustained reading. I read a lot about Japanese history, poetry, art. I've reported extensively on Japan, but yeah, I do think it was a lacuna, and I write about it. I have a whole chapter on Japanese language and my failure at learning the language. I'm very explicit about that. And it was different, for example, with my book on China, because I did learn Chinese, and I think I had a very different experience in China as a result. Whereas in Japan, my experience was very expat, and in China it was much more local, and that was definitely a factor of the comfort with the language.
Absolutely. I agree with your opinion. And that's the reason I really enjoyed reading your book, because every time I was reading every chapter, I had that, I told you that I was like virtually writing that chapter in my mind. What is my experience, the parallel experience in that. But I think like every country changed the. When you travel to Japan and when I traveled first time to Japan was quite different. So
could
maybe
you, Siddharth, since this is a conversation between the two of us, I would like you maybe to tell me a bit more about when you read my book and how you were comparing it to your own experiences of when you first went to Japan 20 years earlier or in the early 2000s. What were the big differences that struck you? Like, what was it that you were thinking, oh, this has changed? I'm curious myself, and I'm sure our audience is.
Yes. So when I visited, I think every moment, it was like, okay, I'm a foreigner, no matter Indian or anybody, and this is very strange place where I have to make sure that I must learn language, otherwise it's very difficult to survive. Especially if you step out of a central Tokyo. I'm not even talking about suburban area. Then it's going to be tough. So first goal is to learn the language as much as possible. Try to practice it. Though till today I cannot read the Japanese because I never went to school. I tried and failed, because anyway, when I was in university that time also, I never liked university. So so no question. So that is what I feel when now people travel to Japan. Many Indians travel, many other people travel, but I think the life is far more easy now. So that is one very big difference. And another difference, as I told you, that initially when I visited Japan, I was mostly surrounded by Japanese, but those all were familiar Japanese. I had many friends from Japan who were already coming in India and staying with me for the homestay as a student. I mean, we grew up together, so already I had friends. But because I was surrounded by Japanese, many things became easier for me. Many things they took care of. So I never realized that, yeah, it can be a struggle. So surrounding by Japanese, only Japanese, and they are helping you is quite different. And but at the same time, when you are on your own, now is easier than earlier. It was very difficult. You just go to the little far suburban station and you don't have English signboard. Now You go all over Japan, you don't find only English, but you find Korean, Chinese, and they keep on adding a different languages to it, depending on which countries tourists are flowing in more. So it's different. That time, Japan was a place where people don't go for tourism, people go for work, or people go for some other reason, but not purely for tourism. Now it is completely different. So yeah, so that was quite interesting, and that's why I feel interesting. I feel a little bit outsider, to be open, frank, while reading your book, and I feel, oh, okay, maybe this is a real experience people are facing, and I never went through that. So I was feeling like outsider, and it feels me much more interesting to read that book. I feel like, oh, okay, I got it. I was lucky sometime, of course. Yeah.
How interesting. No, that was
So
very interesting to hear. Please go on.
yeah, no, that's I mean that those were the two major differences. Then probably many things are similar, but you face because society don't change so rapidly, people don't change so rapidly, though the other things change. But I think major changes, major those, yeah.
So, I think some of what you were talking about was also a push that literally happened while I was there. Like I moved in 2016 and they
Yeah.
were going to host the Olympic Games in 2020. So they
Correct.
had the last 4 years. And there was a big drive towards trying to make it more accessible for foreigners. Because, you would have a situation where for a month, they imagined there would be millions of people at the same time coming from around the world. And this is also coupled with Abe-san's push to increase tourism. It was a big thing for the last 3 or 4 years. And the number of tourists going to Japan had, in fact, grown exponentially. Like every year it was doubling and tripling during the years that I was there. And it was like government policy driven. So as part of that, I think putting signages in English was a big thing. And many people told me that, 10 years ago, that was not the case. And that completely changed the navigability of the city for the outsider. And also in the metro stations and train stations, now the information points, people speak English, Japanese people speak English. But the other thing is that even then, they don't speak that much English. So I think this being Japan, there's a lot of reliance on technology. And so people using translators that you can speak into, that had become very common. So all of them were equipped with these translators. So you could, have basically translation, AI translation-based services. So, and then now, of course, we have Google Maps and all that. And, so for directions and all, it becomes a lot easier. And so certainly I can imagine it being a very different place 20 years ago than for the outsider and for the traveler especially than it is today. But, I have to say that I experienced very similar to how you've described when I went to China. I arrived there in 2001, zero English anywhere. And, there was a small expat community. It was impossible to get by without speaking Chinese, which is why I think I learned Chinese as well. Like you had to learn Japanese. It was just part of what we had to do. And but that makes for a very interesting experience. So I would love for one day for you to write a book, Siddharth, and to hear about Japan in the early 2000s.
Many people told me, but the writing is something which I feel so afraid of. Yeah, but another interesting thing I felt about your book is it almost covered up all aspect of life you can imagine. You are talking about the food, and honestly speaking, the food you couldn't adjust when your JNTU has invited you, and that whole lot of kyoshuku and those kind of a food. And then you are talking about toilets, you are talking about the incident with police, lost and found, and
Yes.
everything. So do you want to suggest this book? If yes, of course, it is not a guidebook, but I think it is better than guidebook. That because if somebody is going for a little bit of a long-term stay, then instead of writing a guidebook, it is better to read this kind of a book, especially written by you, because most of the books are then written by Westerners. Again, the experience change.
Correct. No, absolutely. I mean, this book is at the heart a travelogue. It is an account of an extended period of travel in Japan. And these are the kind of books I think that the thinking traveler usually has accompanying them when they visit a new place. Because, you can look up these days on Google, like information on hotels and restaurants. You no longer need the Lonely Planet guide, which gives you listings. Those listings are all available on the internet, and with your smartphone it's very easy to find where is the museum and opening hours. So you don't need that kind of practical information, but this is kind of giving you something that's much deeper and below just that kind of a practical information about travel, and giving you an insight, a glimpse into something deeper about, and hopefully exciting a kind of curiosity and creating an anticipation in the traveler of, oh, this is interesting, this sounds interesting, and then comparing your own experiences with the experiences I had, kind of like what you did, right? And what I was saying, we have a million different truths. So, maybe somebody goes in there and sees the toilets and has a different reaction, or experiences the food and has a different reaction. So, no, the point is really to whet appetites in an intelligent, in-depth way. So while it's not a comprehensive book, it's not a superficial book. I try to really back it up with detailed research. And I said 3 years of or 4 years of empirical experience of living in the country. It's not like you go for 2 months and come back and write the book. But at the same time, this should be the starting point. And then depending on your own interests, you might be more interested in haiku, you might be more interested in architecture, you might be more interested in the history of the Meiji Reformation, or whatever it is, then you can go deeper into that particular area. So this is a snapshot, hopefully, of contemporary Japan seen through Indian eyes, and written, I hope, in an accessible, funny, or relatable way.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's very, very entertaining to read. Sometimes it may offend some author, but I would like to say that your book is more of an entertainment and then of a knowledge, because information. But then when it is entertaining, when you start reading and you just go until end, automatically you are more interested in information. So it's kind of a dialogue like book. I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Siddharth. That's lovely to hear. And I'm really glad to have the opportunity to talk to you, given how closely you seem to have read the book.
So my final question,
yes.
Because we have time constraints,
living,
I can go on talking with you, and someday maybe
next time
opportunity we'll talk. The final question is, what was your favorite part of this book? And then what is your next project? Is it something related to Japan or something else you are working on?
Okay, my favorite part of the book, this is a very difficult question, because like I was saying earlier, when people say what is your favorite part of Japan is already hard enough, but favorite part of my book is really asking me to choose between my kids, right? But I guess the thing that I enjoy a lot are Japanese haiku. I like basho and isa, and I know this sounds very esoteric for many people who are maybe not so interested in medieval sort of early modern poetry, but I just feel that there is this really wonderful sense of suggestion. It's very evocative, the way the haiku is written, because it's very few words, and just from an image they try to convey a deeper, more profound truth. And I feel in some ways my book is a bit like that. I mean, it aspires to that, because it's also suggesting, and it's a snapshot, just like the haiku are. And to find the kind of haiku that were appropriate and sprinkle them throughout the book, connecting what I'm writing today to Japanese history, tradition, aesthetics. I really enjoyed that, and that sort of voyage of poetry and poetic discovery of haiku was maybe my favorite part of writing the book. And you asked about my next project. It's actually the Global Jigsaw. I think you've read some of the pieces. It's my weekly newsletter that I write on global culture, and really trying to connect the dots between different different parts of the world. I've been doing it since February this year, and every week I produce a personal essay on some aspect of global travel, global culture, global society, trying to talk about how we fit together in this world in a jigsaw, in a larger jigsaw.
Very, very interesting talking with you. It's really, really amazing that how keenly you observe the things and then write about them. And as you rightly say, you really connect those dots and produce something which is so entertaining, but as well as so much informative. Because people attention on a reading is slowly going down, but when they are interesting, but something when it is interesting, people do even today, right? I'm sure you must have experienced in Japan. There are still huge big bookshops which are disappearing from India, is a very, very sad fact. But in Japan there are still many bookshops and people do read books, and I'm sure this book will be also read by many people, and we are already going to give some copies of your book to few of our guests, those who read, we know, and they are interested in Japan. So that I think this is going to be a great gift for them. And
thank you so much. Here's the cover of the book. And I hope many people who are watching this today are also inspired to go out and buy it. But thank you for this opportunity. And I'm very glad that some of the other panelists and guests will get the opportunity to have copies as well.
Definitely, absolutely. I hope to catch up with you some other time on some other forum or in person. But thank you so much for giving your 1 hour and being our guest at Konnichiwa Pune. Konnichiwa Pune is a platform where we connect Indian and Japanese enthusiastic people. Business come later. First, we talk different aspects of life, and business automatically happens. That's what I believe. And see you soon. Thank you so much. You are free to stay back if you wish, and we will continue with the next session. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.